Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the deeply profound and, honestly, entirely unique writings of St. John the Evangelist. If you've ever read the four Gospels and felt a sudden shift, almost like one of them is just operating on a totally different wavelength, well, you were definitely noticing the work of St. John. We're going to unpack exactly who he was, what makes his writings so distinct, and why his specific vision has captivated readers for literally 2,000 years.
Just listen to this opening line. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Think about how radically that contrasts with the other Gospels. There's no Bethlehem manger here, no genealogies tracing ancestors, no shepherds out in a field. Instead, St. John makes a direct, unapologetic leap right into eternity. He wants us looking at the divine nature of Jesus Christ from the very first syllable. To get a solid grasp on this complex text, we'll be structuring our explainer today around 5 key parts. First, the beloved disciple. Second, a gospel from eternity. Third, the great I am. Fourth, the symbol of the eagle. And finally, complement, not contradiction.
Okay, let's jump straight into section 1, the beloved disciple. Who was St. John?
Before he was known to history as the beloved disciple, John's origins were actually quite humble. He was the son of Zebedee and Salome, the younger brother of St. James the Greater, and basically just a Galilean fisherman working the Sea of Galilee. He wasn't some elite scholar or a Pharisee. But that famous title, the beloved disciple, is so crucial. It doesn't mean Jesus loved him more than the rest of the guys. Rather, it was John's humble way of identifying himself by the absolute greatest gift he'd ever received, Christ's love.
John, along with Peter and his brother James, formed Christ's inner circle. Talk about an exclusive VIP pass, right? They didn't just hear the public sermons. They witnessed some of the most sacred, intense, and frankly mind-blowing moments of Jesus' earthly ministry. They were the only ones brought in to see the raising of Jairus' daughter. They witnessed the blinding glory of the Transfiguration, and they were the ones asked to stay close during Jesus' agonizing moments in the Garden of Gethsemane.
But where John truly sets himself apart is at the very end of Jesus' earthly life. Unlike the vast majority of the disciples who just fled in fear when things got dangerous, John remained faithfully right at the foot of the cross. And it was there that Jesus actually entrusted the Blessed Mother to his care, saying, "Behold your mother." John welcomed Mary into his home. From leaning on Jesus at the Last Supper to standing firm at the crucifixion, he's the ultimate example of faithful discipleship. And interestingly enough, traditional history tells us he eventually died a natural death at an advanced age, totally unlike the other apostles who were martyred.
Moving on to section 2, a gospel from eternity, written around AD 90 to 100. So let's dive into the context for a second, because the environment a text is written in tells you so much about its purpose. St. John wrote this document late in the 1st century. That timeline is a huge deal. He was writing specifically for an audience of Christians who were facing severe persecution and actively dealing with false teachings about who Christ actually was. Because of that pressure, John's core focus isn't just a basic historical retelling. He zeroes in intensely on the full divinity of Jesus Christ, presenting him as the eternal Word, the Logos, made flesh. And here's the really crucial point. Because of this unique focus on divinity, John intentionally includes dramatic events and deep theological discourses that the synoptic Gospels, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke, entirely leave out. Think about these pivotal moments: the wedding at Cana where water becomes wine, Nicodemus' secret nighttime visit, that profound conversation with the Samaritan woman at the well, the incredible raising of Lazarus, the deeply symbolic washing of the disciples' feet. You literally won't find these anywhere else. John is handpicking moments that specifically highlight the divine mystery of Christ.
Which brings us to section 3, the great I am, echoing Exodus.
Building on those unique events, John records a highly distinct pattern of speech from Jesus, these famous I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. Now, this isn't just some nice poetic language. According to the source material, these statements deliberately echo the divine name of God, I am who I am, which was revealed to Moses in the book of Exodus. By recording Jesus using this exact phrasing, John is firmly, unambiguously establishing Christ's divine nature. He is directly connecting the Jesus of the 1st century to the God of the Old Testament.
Let's look at section 4 now, the symbol of the eagle, a lofty vision. For centuries, Christian tradition has assigned specific symbols to the 4 gospel writers. John's is the eagle, and honestly, it makes perfect sense.
Just as an eagle is said to fly higher than any other bird and has this unique ability to gaze directly into the sun, well, John's writing operates at a completely different altitude. It invites believers to soar way above earthly history and contemplate heavenly glory. It basically stares directly into the blinding light of Christ's eternal divinity without ever looking away.
All right, our final section, part 5, complement, not contradiction. 1 faith, 4 gospels. If you study biblical history for any length of time, you'll quickly find that skeptics often point to the dramatic differences in tone, timeline, and speech in John's gospel to make a very specific claim. They argue that John presents an entirely different Jesus than the one we find in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They suggest there's a fundamental contradiction right there in the foundational texts of Christianity.
Catholic apologetics, however, fiercely reject this claim. They argue that these texts don't contradict at all. They actually complement each other perfectly. Think of it like this. While the synoptic gospels emphasize what Jesus did, his actions, his parables, his daily ministry, John's gospel emphasizes who Jesus is, his identity, his divine origin. Together, they merge the actions of Jesus with his true identity to proclaim one unified faith, just told from 4 inspired perspectives.
Actually, John himself explicitly states his entire thesis in chapter 20. He tells us exactly why he wrote the book. These are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. He's openly admitting here that his work isn't merely a dry historical logbook. It is a targeted testimony, inspired by the Holy Spirit, and designed specifically to spark and sustain belief in whoever reads it.
Ultimately, the source notes that John's own life story mirrors the message of his gospel. Look at his trajectory. Leaning on Jesus at the Last Supper, standing bravely at the cross, caring for Mary, he shows us through his actions that true Christianity is about deep, personal devotion rather than just memorizing a set of rules. It is absolutely about proximity, loyalty, and remaining steadfast.
And this powerful line from John's epistles perfectly sums up his enduring legacy. Little children, let us love, not in word or speech, but in truth and action. It is a brilliant call to authentic, active love, especially in the face of the massive adversity his audience was facing. Because it's not enough to just talk about theology, right? The lofty vision of the eagle eventually has to land on the ground in the way you actually live your life.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Looking at the remarkable life of the beloved disciple, we really have to ask ourselves, will you remain faithfully by your convictions, like John at the foot of the cross, even when the rest of the world turns away in fear? I'll leave you to ponder that question as you reflect on the eagle's vision. And I highly encourage you to open up these fascinating texts and explore the soaring heights of St. John's Gospel for yourself. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep learning.